The rain had no business being that beautiful. That was the first thing Caleb Mercer thought when he stepped out of the glass elevator and onto the rooftop terrace of the Astor Grand Hotel, a crystal glass of whiskey in his hand and absolutely no desire to be at yet another charity gala hosted in his family's name. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the railing like something pulled from a dream, and the rain, a fine, silver mist more than actual drops, caught the light in a way that made the whole city look like it was breathing. He was 29 years old, worth more money than he could ever meaningfully spend, and profoundly, quietly bored. "You look like a man who's allergic to fun," said a voice beside him. He turned. She was leaning against the railing with the casual confidence of someone who had decided the party inside was beneath her consideration. She wore a deep green dress that had clearly not cost what most of the other dresses in that room had cost, and she didn't seem to care even a little. Her dark hair was damp at the edges from the mist, and she was looking at the city, not at him, with an expression he couldn't quite name, something between wonder and exhaustion. "Caleb Mercer," he said, extending a hand. She glanced at it, then at him, with a half-smile that suggested she found the formality slightly ridiculous, given that they were both standing in the rain on a rooftop. "I know who you are," she said, shaking it anyway. "Nora Ellis." "Do you work for the foundation?" he asked, because it was the only polite explanation for why someone in a dress that modest would be at an event with a $5,000 table minimum. "I'm a photographer," she said. "I was hired to document the event. I finished 2 hours ago." She paused. "I just didn't want to leave yet." He looked at her then, really looked, and found himself unexpectedly curious. In a room full of people who wanted something from him, a donation, a connection, a photograph of themselves standing next to the Mercer name, this woman had wandered onto a rainy rooftop because she wasn't ready to go home. "What are you photographing now?" he asked, nodding toward the camera still hanging from her shoulder. She looked down at it like she'd forgotten it was there. "Nothing, everything." She shrugged. "Sometimes I just carry it." They talked for 2 hours. He couldn't have told anyone what they talked about exactly. The city, her work, a documentary they'd both seen about deep-sea fishing off the coast of Nova Scotia, the strange particular loneliness of being in a crowd. She was funny, in a dry, sideways way that snuck up on him. She pushed back when he said something she disagreed with, which almost nobody did. She asked him questions about himself that weren't about his company or his net worth or his family's philanthropic legacy, and when he answered honestly, more honestly than he usually allowed himself, she listened, like she meant it. The mist turned to actual rain somewhere around midnight, and they retreated inside, finding a corner table where the noise of the winding down gala gave them cover. He ordered another whiskey. She asked for sparkling water, and then looked mildly embarrassed about it, which made him like her even more. "I should go," she said around 1 in the morning, gathering her bag. "I don't want you to," he said, and then was almost surprised he'd said it out loud. She looked at him for a long moment, not coyly, not calculating, just looking the way she'd looked at the skyline, with that expression he still couldn't name. "Okay," she said quietly. "Not yet." They stayed until the hotel staff began stacking chairs around them, and even then they moved to the lobby. And then, because neither of them was willing to end the conversation, to a diner 3 blocks away that served eggs and coffee at 2 in the morning and didn't ask any questions. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sat in a vinyl booth under fluorescent lights. He found he didn't mind it at all. She told him about growing up in Ohio, in a house where money was always a subject discussed in hushed, worried voices. She told him about her mother, who had worked double shifts at a hospital for 15 years so Nora could go to art school, and how she carried that sacrifice with her every single day like something sacred. She told him she'd moved to New York 4 years ago with 2 suitcases and a camera her mother had saved for 3 years to buy her, and that some months were still very hard, and that she didn't say that as a complaint, just as a fact. Caleb told her about his father, which he almost never did, about the way Graham Mercer had looked at him his entire childhood, not with cruelty, but with a specific kind of indifference that was somehow worse. About growing up in houses so large you could go days without encountering another person, and how that had taught him a particular brand of self-sufficiency that looked a lot like loneliness from the outside. "You're not what I expected," she said, sometime around 3 in the morning. "What did you expect?" She considered. "Someone who uses the word portfolio as a verb." He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the social performance of laughing, and she looked quietly pleased with herself. They walked back to the hotel in the rain, which had settled into something gentle and indifferent. He offered to call her a car. She said she preferred the subway. He said he'd walk her to the station. She let him. At the entrance to the 57th Street station, under a streetlight that buzzed faintly in the wet air, she turned to face him. "Tonight was unexpected," she said. "Good unexpected?" She smiled, and it was the fullest smile he'd seen from her all evening, the one that reached all the way up. "Yes," she said. "Good unexpected." He kissed her then, soft and careful, the way you kiss someone you don't want to frighten off. She kissed him back, which told him something important. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Yes," she said again, in that same quiet, certain way. She went down the steps into the station. He stood at the top and watched her go, and at the bottom she turned and looked up at him once, and then she was gone. He went back to his penthouse apartment and sat in the dark for a while, feeling something he didn't have a precise word for. Something like being found, maybe. Something like the specific relief of a long tension finally releasing. He texted her the next morning. "Last night was the best night I've had in longer than I can remember. Breakfast?" He waited all day. She never replied. By evening he checked the number. It was right. He had entered it correctly from the card she'd given him. He called. It rang 4 times and went to a generic voicemail with no name attached. He tried twice more over the following week, then stopped because he had some dignity. He asked the hotel for the contact information of the photographer they had contracted for the event. The events coordinator called back 2 days later, apologetic and confused. The booking had been made through a third-party agency. The photographer listed was a man named David Cho, and no one named Nora Ellis appeared anywhere in their records. He hired a private firm, quietly. Not because he was obsessive, he told himself this firmly, but because the evening had been real. She had been real, and her disappearance made no sense. They found nothing. No Nora Ellis with the right age and description registered in New York. No social media presence, no photography business by that name. She had been there, warm and real and laughing at 2 in the morning over eggs and bad coffee, and then she had simply ceased to exist. The years that followed were full, in the way that years always are when you have enough money and enough obligation to keep you moving. He took over as CEO of Mercer Capital at 31. He expanded the foundation. He dated, occasionally, women who were appropriate and interesting, and with whom he felt precisely nothing that resembled what he'd felt on that rooftop in the rain. He stopped thinking about her, mostly. Then came the Tuesday morning in October, 7 years later, almost to the month, when his assistant placed a printed briefing packet on his desk about a small non-profit organization in Portland, Oregon, that Mercer Capital's Foundation Committee had shortlisted for a significant grant. The organization was called Open Shutter. It provided free photography education to children in low-income communities. On the inside cover of the briefing packet was a photograph of the program director, credited as the organization's founder. Caleb Mercer set down his coffee very slowly and stared at the face in that photograph for a long time. Nora Ellis. The name printed beneath it in clean black type, as if 7 years hadn't passed, as if she hadn't vanished from the earth entirely. She was smiling in the photograph the same way she had smiled at the top of those subway stairs, and standing beside her, looking up at the camera with her same dark eyes, was a small boy who looked to be about 6 years old. Caleb did not make impulsive decisions. That was something people said about him in boardrooms and financial publications, and the occasional profile piece that painted him as the steady, measured counterpoint to his more volatile industry peers. Graham Mercer's son had inherited none of his father's recklessness and all of his precision. Caleb Mercer was the man who read every clause of every contract before signing, who slept on major decisions for 72 hours minimum, who had once walked away from a 9-figure acquisition because something in the numbers felt slightly wrong and he couldn't articulate what. only to watch the target company collapse 18 months later. He was not impulsive, and yet by noon on that Tuesday, he had already told his assistant to rebook his Wednesday afternoon and clear Thursday entirely, and by 2 o'clock, he was on a call with his foundation director, Margaret Holt, asking her to send him everything they had on Open Shutter, not the briefing summary, everything. "That's a fairly small grant request for this level of personal attention," Margaret said, in the careful tone she used when she thought he was making an unusual choice. "I'm thorough," he said. Margaret had worked for him for 6 years. She said, "Of course," and sent him everything. He read it all that evening in his apartment, the city going dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Open Shutter had been founded 6 years ago in Portland, Oregon. It had started in a rented church basement with 12 students, 2 donated cameras, and a program director who, according to a local newspaper feature from the organization's second year, had designed the entire curriculum herself, working nights after her day job at a commercial photography studio. The organization now operated out of a permanent facility, served over 200 students annually between the ages of 7 and 17, had a small but dedicated staff of 4 full-time employees and 11 part-time instructors, and had produced 2 students who had gone on to receive full scholarships to art programs at recognized universities. It was by any measure a genuinely remarkable thing that one person had built largely by herself. There were more photographs of her throughout the materials. Nora crouching beside a young girl, adjusting the focus on a camera too large for her hands. Nora standing at the front of a classroom, something written on a whiteboard behind her. Nora at what appeared to be a fundraising event, in a simple black dress laughing at something off camera. She looked almost exactly the same. A little more settled, maybe. Something in her posture that had solidified into confidence, where before it had been something quieter and more careful. But the same dark eyes, the same quality of paying full attention, and in several of the photographs, at her side or nearby, the boy. He appeared in enough of the materials that Caleb began to form a picture. He was somewhere around 6, perhaps just turned 7. Small for his age, perhaps. He had Nora's coloring and her particular way of holding himself. That self-contained stillness that she'd had on the rooftop, that sense of existing fully inside the present moment. In one photograph, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor of what looked like the Open Shutter classroom, very seriously examining a photograph print. In another, he was asleep in a chair in what was clearly an office, a small sneaker hanging half off his foot. There was no mention of him in any of the organizational materials, no mention of a husband or partner in any of the press coverage. The newspaper feature from year 2 referred to Nora simply as a single mother and first-time non-profit founder, a detail delivered in a single clause and then moved past, the way journalists moved past facts they found unremarkable. Caleb set the folder down and walked to the window and stood there for a long time watching the lights of the city. He was 36 years old. He was not a man who believed in ghosts or signs or the romantic idea that the universe arranged things according to some meaningful pattern. He believed in data and causality and the demonstrable truth of numbers. But the number kept occurring to him, quietly and persistently, the way an unbalanced column in a spreadsheet nagged at the back of the mind. 7 years. The boy looked 6, perhaps 7. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself that one evening, extraordinary as it had been, did not entitle him to conclusions or assumptions about a woman's private life. He told himself that the professional reason for this trip was entirely sufficient and that any other consideration was irrelevant. He booked a flight to Portland for Thursday morning. The Open Shutter facility was on a quiet street in the northeast part of the city, tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, in a building that had been painted a warm terracotta and had 2 large front windows displaying student photographs. Caleb stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going in, which was not something he typically did. He was not a man who hesitated on sidewalks. Inside, a young woman at a front desk looked up with a professional smile that shifted very slightly when she registered who he was. That happened sometimes, in certain circles, and he had learned to be neither flattered nor annoyed by it. "Caleb Mercer," he said. "I have an appointment with Ms. Ellis. I'm with the Mercer Foundation." "Of course," she said, and picked up a phone. He heard the voice before he saw her, coming from a hallway to the left, saying something to someone about a shipment of film that had come in damaged, and they'd need to contact the supplier before Friday. Practical, direct, no wasted words. Then she came around the corner. She stopped. The hallway was maybe 15 feet long, and they were at opposite ends of it, and for a moment neither of them moved. Her expression went through several things in rapid succession: shock, something almost like fear, and then a careful, deliberate composure that she pulled around herself like a curtain being drawn. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was steady. "Thank you for making the trip." "Ms. Ellis," he said, equally steady. They shook hands. Her grip was firm and brief. She did not look away from his face, which took a specific kind of nerve, and he noted that she had it. She showed him into a small conference room with a round table and chairs that didn't match, and poured him coffee from a carafe on a side table without asking if he wanted any, which he found he didn't mind. She sat across from him with a thin folder of materials, clearly prepared, clearly organized, and for 30 minutes she walked him through open shutters programs, outcomes, budget, and funding needs with the precision of someone who had made this presentation many times and believed in every word of it. She was professional and thorough and gave absolutely nothing away. He asked good questions. She gave complete answers. It was entirely normal. When the presentation concluded, she folded her hands on the table and looked at him. "Is there anything else you'd like to know about the organization?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "The boy in the photographs," he said, "in the annual report. Is he your son?" Something moved across her face, quick, controlled, but there. "Yes," she said. "How old is he?" A pause, less than a second. But he caught it. "He just turned 7, she said. "In August." August. The gala had been in September, 7 years ago. The math was not complicated. It landed somewhere in his chest, quiet and enormous, like a stone dropped into still water. He kept his face exactly where it was. "He looks like you," Caleb said. "Everyone says that," she said lightly. "The way you say something lightly when you are working very hard to keep it light." He nodded slowly, looked down at the folder in front of him, looked back up at her. "Nora," he said, and it was the first time he'd said her name, and he watched the effect of it, the small, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. "What is his name?" he asked. She held his gaze for a long moment. In that moment he saw everything she was calculating, everything she was weighing. He saw, beneath the composure, something that looked very much like someone who had been bracing for this for a long time, and had hoped, against evidence, that it would not come. "Lucas," she said quietly. "Lucas." He said nothing for a moment, letting the name sit between them. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up visit," he said finally, his voice professionally neutral. "There are a few more things I'd like to understand about the program before the foundation makes its decision." "Of course," she said, same careful composure. "Whatever you need." He stood, and she stood, and they shook hands again at the door of the conference room, and her hand was very steady, and so was his. He walked out through the lobby and out the front door, and stood again on the sidewalk in the thin Portland October light, and breathed. Lucas. 7 years old in August. He had a son. He gave himself exactly 24 hours. That was the number he landed on, walking back to his hotel through the quiet Portland streets, with his hands in his coat pockets, and the kind of focused stillness that came over him when a situation required careful thought rather than immediate action. 24 hours to sit with what he knew, to let the facts arrange themselves into something he could examine without the interference of the thing happening in the center of his chest, that low, persistent pressure that he refused for the moment to name. The facts were these. Nora Ellis had attended a charity gala in Manhattan 7 years ago. They had spent an evening together that had felt to him like something significant. She had disappeared the following morning without explanation. She had a son named Lucas, who had just turned 7 years old in August. The gala had been in September 7 years ago. The math was, As he had noted in that conference room, not complicated. What the facts did not tell him was why. He ordered room service he didn't eat and sat in the chair by the window watching the city outside go through its evening rhythms, and he thought about the expression on her face in that conference room, not when he had walked in, though that had been revealing enough, but later, when he had asked for Lucas's name. The expression of someone opening a door they had kept locked for a very long time, and not yet knowing whether what came through it would destroy them. She had been afraid, not of him exactly, of the moment, of its arriving. That told him something important, which was that she had thought about it, had anticipated it, had been in some part of herself waiting. He slept poorly and was up before 6, and by 7 he had made a decision, which was that he was not going to approach this the way the situation might seem to demand, with lawyers or demands, or the kind of entitled certainty that his wealth could have purchased. He was going to go back and talk to her. Only that. He called the front desk at Open Shutter at 9 and asked if Ms. Ellis had any availability that morning. There was a pause, and then the receptionist said she would check, and then there was a longer pause, and then, "She says she can see you at 10:30. She had known he would call. She was waiting in the conference room when he arrived, seated already, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug in a way that suggested she needed something to hold on to. She had clearly not slept well either. There were shadows under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back more quickly than it had been yesterday, and she looked, for the first time since he had walked into this building, like someone whose composure was maintained by effort rather than ease. He sat down across from her. She spoke first. "I know what you're going to ask," she said, "and I know I owe you an answer. I've known that for 7 years." She paused. "I just didn't expect it to be you sitting across from me. I thought, if it ever happened, it would be through someone else. A letter, maybe. Something I could control." "You could have reached out," he said carefully. "I know." She looked at her coffee. "I almost did. Several times." She looked back up at him. "Lucas is yours, Caleb. I think you already knew that, but I want to say it clearly. He's your son." The words, spoken plainly in the quiet of that small room, landed differently than the conclusion he had already reached on his own. Knowing a thing and hearing it said were different experiences, it turned out. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me why." She took a breath. Not stalling, gathering. The difference was visible. "When I met you," she said, "I wasn't Nora Ellis, the photographer building something in New York. I was Nora Ellis, who had left Ohio 6 months earlier with almost nothing, who was freelancing under a business name I hadn't legally registered yet, who was 1 bad month away from having to call her mother and admit it hadn't worked." She paused. "I was also, as of 3 weeks before that gala, quietly involved in a legal dispute with the agency that had originally booked me. They were claiming I had taken a client from them. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. I had no money for a lawyer. And they did." He listened without interrupting. "I went to that gala because a colleague passed the booking to me last minute. I wasn't supposed to be there." She almost smiled briefly at the strangeness of it. "And then the evening happened, and it was—" She stopped, started again. "It was real. I want you to know that. Every part of it was real. But you left. I left because I woke up the next morning and I was in over my head, in a way I hadn't fully understood the night before," she said quietly. "You were Caleb Mercer. Your family name was on buildings. I was nobody who might be sued into bankruptcy by a mid-sized talent agency." She met his eyes. "I didn't think I belonged in your world. I didn't think you'd want me there, and I didn't want to find out I was right." He absorbed that. "And when you found out you were pregnant," she set the mug down. "I found out 2 months later I had already moved. I'd left New York, partly because of the legal situation, partly because I needed a reset. I was in Portland, staying with a friend, trying to figure out what came next." She paused. "I thought about calling you. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it seriously more than once. But by then I had convinced myself a story, that you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I was after something, that bringing a child into that world, the money, the attention, the expectations, would be worse for both of us than not. That wasn't your decision to make," he said. He kept his voice level, but she heard what was underneath it, and she didn't look away from it. I know, she said. That's the thing I've had to live with, I know. A silence settled between them, not hostile but weighted. Outside the conference room, the sounds of the building coming to life, voices in the hallway, the distant laughter of a child somewhere in the facility. Does he know anything? Caleb asked. He knows his father and I met when we were young and that things didn't work out. That's all. She paused. He's asked more questions lately. He's 7. He's starting to notice that other kids have fathers. He's very... Her voice softened fractionally. He's very matter-of-fact about it. He asked me last month if his dad was a good person. I told him yes. Caleb looked at her steadily. What did you base that on? She held his gaze. One evening, she said quietly, and the fact that I've never once believed I was wrong about it. The pressure in his chest shifted into something more complex. He looked down at the table, looked back up. I want to meet him, he said. I know. She nodded slowly. I expected that. Not today, he said. Not like this, but soon. He paused. And I want you to understand something. I'm not going to use lawyers or make threats or treat this as a transaction. That's not what I'm here for. She looked at him with an expression he recognized from 7 years ago, that particular quality of attention, the way she listened as if it mattered. Then what are you here for? She asked. He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think. I'm here because a photograph landed on my desk and I got on a plane, he said. Because 7 years ago something happened that I never found a satisfactory explanation for, and I'd like one, and because apparently I have a son named Lucas who I haven't met yet, and I'd like to change that. He paused. Beyond that, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I have a plan. Something in her face shifted, a small releasing, like a thread of tension going slack. He loves photography, she said after a moment. He carries a little point and shoot everywhere. He photographs everything, birds, puddles, his shoes. She almost smiled. He has strong opinions about composition for a 7-year-old. Where does he get that? Caleb said. From me, she said. And then, quieter, maybe from you too. I don't know you well enough to say. The sentence hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its words. Outside, the child's laughter came again, closer now, and they both turned toward the sound without meaning to. A simultaneous, unplanned movement, and in the half-second before either of them looked away, Caleb understood that whatever came next, the story was not what he had spent 7 years assuming it was. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't indifference. It was fear. And fear, unlike indifference, had something to work with. The meeting happened on a Saturday. Nora had suggested it, which surprised him slightly. He had expected her to need more time, more careful negotiation, more of the measured caution she had demonstrated in every interaction since he had walked back into her life. But on Friday afternoon, she had sent him a short message. Lucas has his photography class in the morning. He's always in a good mood after. If you want to come by the facility around noon, I think that could work. He read the message 3 times and then replied, I'll be there. He did not sleep particularly well on Friday night either, which was becoming a pattern in Portland. He lay in the hotel room in the dark and thought about what you said to a 7-year-old boy you had never met, who did not know you existed, who photographed puddles and had strong opinions about composition. He thought about what it meant to walk into someone's life at this late stage, not as an abstraction, a story told carefully to a child about a father who hadn't been there, but as an actual person, who would sit across from him and need to be real. He had negotiated with some of the most formidable figures in American finance. He had delivered difficult news to boards of directors and navigated the collapse of partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars without losing his composure. He was genuinely nervous about meeting a 7-year-old. The open shutter building on a Saturday morning was a different place than it had been on Thursday. The front windows were propped open, and music was coming from somewhere inside, something upbeat and slightly chaotic. 3 kids were sitting on the front step, sharing a bag of chips and arguing about something. with the passionate seriousness that only children could bring to arguments about nothing. One of them glanced up at Caleb as he approached, and then went back to the argument. Nora met him in the lobby. She was in jeans and a worn grey sweater, more relaxed than he had seen her, though he could see the effort of composure still operating just beneath the surface. "He's in the back," she said, "helping put equipment away. He does that after every class. He likes to organize the camera bags." A pause. "I told him I had a friend visiting, someone I knew a long time ago." "How did he take that?" He said okay and went back to the camera bags. She smiled, small and genuine. "He's not a complicated kid. He deals with things as they arrive." "Good quality," Caleb said. "He gets it from somewhere," she said, and this time there was something almost warm in it, something that hadn't been in her voice in the conference room. They walked down the hallway together, past classrooms with student photographs pinned to the walls, past a small office with a window that looked into a garden where someone had planted sunflowers that had grown extravagantly tall. He heard the boy before he saw him, a low, focused humming, the kind that happens when someone is engaged in a task they find satisfying. The equipment room was small and organized, with a neatness that seemed to reflect deliberate effort. Camera bags hung from labeled hooks, lenses were stored in foam-lined cases. A whiteboard on one wall listed equipment by name and condition, each item checked off in green marker. Lucas was on his knees in front of a low shelf, sliding a camera bag into place, with the careful precision of someone who understood that things should be where they belonged. He was small, smaller than Caleb had imagined from the photographs, with dark hair that needed cutting and a grey t-shirt with a small iron-on patch of a camera on the sleeve. He looked up when they came in. He had Nora's eyes, dark, direct, taking in information quickly and without performance. He looked at Caleb with the frank, uncomplicated assessment that children brought to new people before they learned to be polite about it. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Caleb said. "This is Caleb," Nora said, her voice carefully easy. "The friend I mentioned." Lucas nodded and returned to the camera bag, pressing the zipper flat. "Mom said you work with money," he said, not looking up. "That's mostly accurate," Caleb said. "Do you like it?" Caleb considered that. "Sometimes I like solving problems." Lucas looked up again. "Photography is also solving problems," he said, with the certainty of someone stating an established fact. "Like, you have the light and the subject and the frame, and you have to figure out how to make them work together." He paused. "It's kind of like math." "I've never thought of it that way," Caleb said, "but that's exactly right." Something in Lucas's expression shifted, a small opening, the particular pleasure of being agreed with by an adult who seemed to mean it. "Do you want to see what I shot this morning?" he asked. "Very much," Caleb said. Lucas stood up, pulled the small point-and-shoot from his jeans pocket with the ease of long habit, and held it out. Caleb crouched down to eye level. The camera was a simple thing, worn at the edges. The strap knotted where it had broken and been repaired, and clicked through the images. They were extraordinary, not technically polished. The exposures were sometimes off, the focus occasionally soft. But the instinct was there, undeniable. A close-up of morning light through a fogged window. A woman at the edge of the frame looking away, her expression caught in an unguarded moment of something the child had clearly recognized as worth preserving. 3 birds on a wire, evenly spaced, the sky behind them the particular grey of Portland mornings. Caleb looked at them for a long time. He was aware of Nora watching from the doorway, of the weight of the moment, of the particular and unrepeatable nature of this specific Saturday in this small equipment room. "This one," he said, holding the camera so Lucas could see the screen, the woman at the edge of the frame. "This is my favorite. You caught something she didn't know you were catching." Lucas leaned in to look, and in leaning in he closed the distance between them to almost nothing, the way children did without realizing it, without the careful management of proximity that adults practiced. "That's my teacher, Mrs. Calloway," he said. "She was thinking about something, I could tell." "How could you tell?" "Her hands," Lucas said simply. "She was doing this." He demonstrated a slow, unconscious rubbing of one thumb across the palm of the other hand. "People do that when they're working something out." Caleb straightened slowly and looked at Nora in the doorway. She was watching her son with an expression that needed no interpretation, the particular ferocity of a parent's love, the specific quality of pride that tried not to show itself too much for fear of embarrassing the person it was directed at. She caught Caleb looking and didn't look away. There was something in her face now that hadn't been there in the conference room or in the careful conversation of yesterday morning. Something quieter and more exposed, like a room seen after the furniture has been moved and the light falls differently. They had lunch at a restaurant 2 blocks away, a casual place with long wooden tables and a menu written on a chalkboard. Lucas ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and ate half of it, and spent the rest of the meal examining the way the light came through the window and asking Caleb questions about New York with the focused curiosity of someone conducting research. Had he been to the top of tall buildings? Were there really that many people? Was it loud all the time or only sometimes? Caleb answered each question seriously, because the questions were serious, and watched Lucas process the answers with that same quality of complete attention. At one point, Lucas said without looking up from the table, "Mom has pictures she took in New York, from when she was young. They're really good. She doesn't put them up, though. She keeps them in a box." Nora looked at her plate. "Maybe she'll put them up someday," Caleb said. Lucas considered this. "I told her that. I said good pictures shouldn't be in boxes." He looked up. "She said some pictures are private, but I don't think pictures can be private. I think pictures want to be seen." The sentence sat at the table like something that had always been true and had only now been said aloud. Caleb looked at Nora. She looked back at him, and the composure she had been holding for 3 days did something then. Didn't break exactly, but softened into something that was, he thought, much closer to her actual face. "Lucas," she said quietly, "go wash your hands before dessert." Lucas slid off the bench without argument and headed toward the back of the restaurant. In the brief space his absence opened, Nora said, "I'm sorry for the years, for deciding without you. I know sorry doesn't cover it." "No," Caleb said, "it doesn't." She nodded, accepting that. "But I'm here now," he said, "and so are you. And that boy just told me that pictures want to be seen, which I think might be the truest thing anyone has said to me in years." He paused. "I'd like to find out what comes next, if you're willing to find that out alongside me." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Portland afternoon had gone gold at the edges, the way autumn light did when it was finally serious about arriving. "I kept the card," she said quietly. "Your number. All 7 years. I never threw it away." He understood what that meant, what it had cost her to admit it, what it suggested about the shape of those 7 years, seen from her side. "Then I think we already know the answer," he said. Lucas came back from the bathroom with damp hands and climbed back onto the bench and announced that he wanted to photograph the dessert before eating it, which was non-negotiable. Nora laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the one he remembered from a diner at 2 in the morning in a city that felt like another lifetime. Caleb felt something settle in his chest, quiet and sure, like a long equation finally balancing. He watched Lucas raise the little camera and squint seriously through the viewfinder at a slice of chocolate cake. Some things, it turned out, were worth finding 7 years later. Some pictures did want to be seen,